Welcome to Thalira Tales, where stories bloom in silence, carrying emotion, mystery, and hidden truth. Step in and let the tale unfold.
My husband told me he had a double procedure and would be at the hospital until morning. But at that exact moment, I was standing behind a stone pillar in the hotel lobby, watching him walk into the elevator with my own 21-year-old sister. I didn't rush in to cause a scene. I calmly gathered my evidence because I knew the game had only just begun. Before we go any further, thank you for being here. It means more than you know. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from, your country, your city. I love knowing who is on the other side of the screen. Note this story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and education. Any resemblance to names or places is coincidental, but the message inside is worth keeping. The candles were Grant's idea. They always were. He had arranged them himself that evening, 3 ivory pillars in the silver holders we had chosen together, at a Connecticut estate sale years ago, back when I believed that shared decisions meant shared values. He was already seated when I came down from the home office, jacket, still on one hand resting on his wine glass, the picture of a man completely at ease with his own life. "You look exhausted," he said, rising slightly as I took my seat, not standing fully, just enough to appear considerate. "Quarter close," I said. "It will pass." "It always does." He reached for the bottle and began to pour. Burgundy, 2019, a label he had selected without asking. "You should let Daniel carry more of the reporting load. You pay him enough." "I prefer to see things myself," I said. Grant smiled, the slow, indulgent smile of a man who had decided that a woman's stubbornness was charming rather than threatening. "That's always been your problem, Sloane. You trust your own eyes too much." If only he had known how right he was. He slid the glass toward me, and I felt my chest tighten the moment my fingers closed around the stem. My heart knocked once hard against my ribs, not from fear, but from the specific effort of appearing calm when every nerve in my body was sending a different signal. I lifted the glass. I brought it to my lips. And then I set it down. "Not drinking?" he asked. "Headache building," I said. "I don't want to make it worse." "You should have said something. I would have opened the white." He turned toward the doorway. "Vera, bring the Sancerre from the lower rack, please." "Of course, Mr. Whitmore," Vera said, appearing immediately. Her eyes found mine for just a fraction of a second before she turned away. I had spoken to Vera 3 days earlier. Not everything, just enough. She had pressed her lips together until they went pale and said low and certain, "I'll keep my eyes open, Miss Sloane. You have my word." And she had kept it. God, she had kept every bit of it. The food arrived, lamb roasted with herbs from the window garden ordered from the restaurant downstairs. Grant ate with appetite, talking about a board dispute at the Institute, a junior researcher who had overstepped a funding committee that needed reshaping. He was animated the way he got when he felt fully in control, cutting the air with his fork to emphasize a point, his voice bright with the pleasure of his own authority. "The problem," he said, "is that people without skin in the game always have the loudest opinions." I said. I was watching the way his jaw moved when he chewed. I was watching his hands steady, certain the hands of a surgeon who had spent 20 years cutting into human hearts and sewing them back together. I thought about what those hands had been doing 11 days ago. My throat tightened so sharply, I had to press my tongue to the roof of my mouth to stop my face from showing it. "You seem far away tonight," he said, studying me. "I was thinking about a position we're restructuring," I said. "I'm sorry, I'll be better company once the headache clears." "Work, work, work." He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His palm was warm. "We should get away. Amalfi, we haven't been since the fund expansion. Somewhere we can just breathe together." And for one terrible moment, something cracked in my chest. Not because I still loved him in the way I once had. I was no longer certain what I felt fell under that word. But because I could remember a version of that hand that had felt like the safest place in the world, and the distance between that memory and this moment was so enormous that my eyes stung suddenly hot and unwanted. I blinked it back hard. I would not cry at this table. I would not give this room, these walls with their hidden cameras. This man sitting across from me with his warm hand and his practiced smile. Anything that looked like breaking. "That sounds nice," I said. "I mean it." His thumb moved across my knuckles. "We've been running too hard. Both of us." "You're right," I said. He squeezed my hand and released it, reaching for his wine with the ease of a man whose conscience was completely unbothered. And perhaps in his own careful architecture of justification, it truly was. Perhaps that was the most frightening part. Not that he was capable of what he had planned, but that he could sit here in warm candlelight with his hand over mine and feel nothing even close to guilt. I picked up my fork. I moved the lamb around the plate. 11 days. In those 11 days, I had made 3 phone calls, reviewed 400 pages of financial records, and set into motion something that could not be undone. He believed he was watching me deteriorate slowly. He believed every advantage was his. He was watching me work. "You look beautiful tonight," he said near the end of the meal. "Thank you," I said. The candles burned between us, steady and unhurried. The city moved 42 floors below, and my husband smiled at me across the table with the comfortable certainty of a man who had already decided how this story would end. I smiled back at him. One of us was right. This is the story of how I made sure it was me. 11 days before that dinner, I followed my husband to the Hilton. The charge appeared on a Tuesday evening, $420, a Midtown hotel, Grant's corporate card run through our joint line. I stared at the number for 11 minutes before I did anything. My thumb hovered over his contact, ready to call. And then something in my chest said no. Not wisdom, not experience. Just the specific stillness that arrives when part of you already knows the answer and is deciding whether to let the rest catch up. I called a car service. Then I changed my mind and drove myself because I needed my hands to be doing something. I reached the hotel at 8:47. I was still in my work clothes, heels that clicked too loudly against the marble lobby floor, each step echoing in my own ears like a warning. My heart was doing something I had no word for. Not racing, heavier than that. Dense, like it had taken on weight it didn't know how to carry. Grant was at the elevator bank, jacket adjusted, phone in hand, looking exactly the way he always did, like a man who had never once in his life been in the wrong place. I stepped behind a column near the concierge desk and pressed my back flat against the marble. Then the elevator opened and she stepped out. The air left my body so fast I had to press both hands flat against the column to keep from swaying. My sister, Jade. My 21-year-old sister in dark clothes, hair loose around her shoulders, walking toward my husband with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times before. She did not hesitate. She did not look around. She walked straight to him, and his hand went immediately to the small of her back, and they stepped into the elevator together. The doors closed. I stood there with my palms flat against cold marble and my throat burning and my eyes filling so fast I had to tip my chin toward the ceiling and blink 3 times hard to keep from sobbing out loud in the middle of the Hilton lobby on a Tuesday night. My knees had gone genuinely soft. I felt it, that terrifying looseness, the body's quiet way of saying this is more than you were built to absorb standing up. I had not felt that in my legs since the night my father died. I breathed in. I breathed out. I gave myself 45 seconds to feel it completely. And then I gave myself the rest of my life to be something else. 41 minutes later, I rode the elevator to the 6th floor. Room 614 had a door that had not caught fully. A strip of gold light spilled into the corridor. I moved toward it slowly, pressing close to the wall. My jaw ached from clenching. My fingernails were cutting into my own palm without my having told them to. Grant's voice came through the gap. Low measured, the tone he used when he was closing something he had already decided. I could not make out full sentences, but I heard 2 words. The policy. Then I saw it through the gap, the upper corner of a document on the desk, the unmistakable logo of a life insurance company printed at the top. The same company. The same policy Grant had suggested we update 18 months ago. For peace of mind, he had set his voice so gentle. In case anything happens to either of us. Something in my chest snapped. Not loudly, more like a cable under too much tension finally giving way. I pressed one hand to my mouth. I pressed the other against the doorframe to keep from going down. I had signed it without reading the fine print. I had trusted him. I stepped back. I walked to the elevator with my face arranged carefully because there were cameras in these corridors, and I was Sloan Whitmore, and I would not come apart in a hallway. I rode down in the company of a businessman on his phone who did not look at me once, which was the kindness I needed most in that moment. I sat in my car. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands until the trembling in my fingers slowed and then stopped. It took longer than I expected. Then I called Julian. "I need your help," I said. My voice came out steady. I had absolutely no idea how. "Tonight. I need you tonight." A beat, then his voice low and immediate. "Sloan, what happened? Talk to me." "I'll explain when I get there," I said, swallowing against the thickness rising in my throat. "Just be there." "I'm already here," he said, and his voice had gone quieter, more careful, the way it did when he understood without being told that this was serious. "I'm not going anywhere. Drive safe." I put the car in drive. Behind me, the hotel lights held steady against the dark. Somewhere on the 6th floor, Grant was still talking, still certain. He was already wrong. The roses arrived every Monday morning at 7:15. 1,000 stems, Ecuador long-stalked, and deep red, delivered in 12 white boxes stacked outside the glass doors of Blackwood Capital before any of my staff arrived. For 6 years I had walked past them the same way I walked past the skyline, barely noticing, assuming they would simply always be there. I had believed they were love. They were a scheduled task in a calendar system. I discovered this on the Wednesday morning after the Hilton, sitting at my desk with a cold cup of coffee and a screen full of open tabs, unable to focus on a single one of them. The grief counselors say that betrayal arrives in waves. What they do not tell you is that some of those waves are not grief at all. They are anger with nowhere to land, hot and restless, pressing against the inside of your ribs like something that needs to get out. I needed something to do, so I started looking. The florist's invoice was easy to find, filed under Grant's personal account, auto-renewed annually, since 2018. I called the number at the bottom of the receipt. "Good morning, Rosemont Florals," a cheerful voice answered. "Good morning," I said. "I am calling about a standing delivery order, account name Whitmore." "One moment," the sound of clicking keys. "Yes, I have it here. 1,000 stems read every Monday. It has been set up on automatic renewal. Would you like to make any changes?" "When was the order originally placed?" I asked. "Let me see." More clicking. "January of 2018. And the card messages were uploaded in full in February of 22. We have them pre-scheduled through 2030. My hand tightened around the phone. "Pre-scheduled," I said. "Yes, ma'am. It is a popular option for our executive clients. Very convenient." I thanked her. I ended the call. And then I pressed both palms flat on my desk and leaned forward until my forehead was nearly touching the screen, breathing through something that felt like the floor dropping out from underneath a building I had lived in for years. Pre-scheduled through 2030. The cards were written before I had even read them. Every handwritten message that had made me smile over the last 4 years. "Thinking of you always, and because you deserve beautiful things, and for my extraordinary wife," every single one of them had been typed into a system by someone who was not Grant, scheduled for delivery and forgotten. I had pressed those cards to my chest. I had saved several of them in the top drawer of my nightstand. I opened the drawer from memory and took out the most recent one. The handwriting was perfect. Of course it was perfect. It had been printed by a professional calligrapher hired by the florist. Grant had not written a single word. My eyes burned. I pressed the heel of my hand against one of them and breathed until the feeling passed, because I had a 9 o'clock call with the Singapore desk, and I was not going to walk into it with red eyes. I was still sitting there when Vera appeared in the doorway. She was carrying a black garbage bag tied at the top, held slightly away from her body, as though it contained something she did not want to touch. Her expression was careful, the look she wore when she had information she was not sure I was ready for. "Miss Sloan," she said, "I need to show you something. I have been holding on to it for 2 weeks, and I think it is time." "Come in," I said. "Close the door." She set the bag on the edge of my desk and folded her hands in front of her. Her knuckles were white. "I found these in the bin in Mr. Whitmore's office. He shredded them, but the shredder was set to strips, not cross-cut." She paused. "I collected the strips before housekeeping came. I did not know why at the time. I think I knew something was wrong before I had words for it." I looked at the bag, then I looked at her. "How long have you been watching him, Vera?" Her chin came up slightly. Long enough, she said quietly. He is not careful at home the way he is outside. People who are used to being trusted rarely are. She hesitated, then added more softly, I am sorry, Miss Sloane. I am so sorry I did not come to you sooner. I kept telling myself I was wrong. I kept hoping I was wrong. Something in her voice cracked on the last word, and I watched her press her lips together hard, fighting it down. Vera had worked in this household for 9 years. She had remembered my coffee order on my first morning as a married woman. She had sent flowers when my father passed. She had, I realized now, been watching Grant long before I had the courage to. You are not wrong, I said, and you have nothing to apologize for. She nodded quickly and looked away toward the window to collect herself. I untied the bag. Inside were hundreds of thin paper strips, shredded documents pale against the black plastic. I lifted a handful and spread them across my desk, turning them slowly, fitting edges together, the way you would a puzzle when you already suspected what the picture was. Most of it was meaningless calendar printouts, old emails. But at the bottom of the bag, held together with a small rubber band someone had not removed before shredding, were 4 strips that fit together perfectly. I lined them up. I read the words twice. At the top of the reassembled fragment, printed in a clean medical font, were 2 characters followed by a number. It's 14. Vera. I said, my voice remarkably steady for a woman whose hands had begun to tremble. I am going to need you to keep Grant's schedule for me. Every arrival, every departure, every phone call you hear. Can you do that? She turned back from the window. Her eyes were dry now, and there was something in them I had not seen before, not fear, but resolution. I have already started, she said. My husband saved lives for a living, or so I believed. Grant had performed over 2,000 cardiac surgeries in 17 years. That number was on his institute's website, beneath a photograph of him in Scrub's arms, crossed expression arranged into the particular brand of confident humility that surgeons and CEOs both learn to perform. I had read that biography so many times over the years that I could have recited it from memory. I had been proud of it. I had pointed to it at dinner parties. The night I checked the hospital logs, I found something that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. Grant had left that afternoon for what he called a double procedure, 2 back-to-back cardiac cases, the kind that kept him at the hospital until 2 or 3 in the morning. I had heard that explanation so many times over the years that it had become furniture, something I registered and moved past without examining. But that evening, after Vera had gone home and the penthouse had settled into the kind of quiet that lets you think too clearly, I sat down at his desk with his hospital login, which he had given me 4 years ago in case of emergencies and never thought to change, and I opened the surgical schedule database. I searched his name. I sorted by date. The most recent entry was 11 days old. I scrolled back further. 6 weeks, 8 weeks. The last verified surgical record with Grant's attending signature was dated 9 weeks and 3 days ago. That cannot be right, I said out loud to no one, to the empty room, to the framed medical degrees watching me from the wall. My voice came out thin and strange in my own ears. I pressed my fingers to my lips and read the screen again, and then a 3rd time, because 3 times is what it takes when your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are showing it. I called Julian. He answered before the 2nd ring. Sloane, it is almost midnight. He has not performed a surgery in 9 weeks, I said. Julian, he has been telling me he is at the hospital 2-3 nights a week, and he has not been there in 9 weeks. A pause. Then carefully, are you certain the records are complete? I am looking at the hospital's own scheduling system, I said. My hand was shaking so badly I had to set the phone on the desk and put it on speaker. Every attending surgeon's cases are logged. His last entry is 9 weeks ago. Every night since then, every single night he said he had a surgery, there is nothing. He does not exist in this system. Okay. Julian's voice shifted into something steadier, more deliberate. Okay. I want you to stay exactly where you are. I have someone, a digital forensics specialist. Her name is Rachel. She has worked with my firm on 3 cases. I am going to call her right now and conference her in. Can you access Grant's phone backup from that computer? His iCloud is linked to the household account, I said. I have the password. Get into it, he said. I will be back in 2 minutes. He was back in 90 seconds. Sloane, this is Rachel. A woman's voice, crisp and unhurried, the voice of someone who had been woken up before and did not consider it a reason to be anything less than precise. Julian has given me the basics. I need you to pull up the FaceTime call logs from your husband's account and look for any calls made to your number during the hours he claimed to be in surgery. I navigated to the call history. I have them, I said. There are dozens. He FaceTimed me from the hospital almost every time he had an overnight case. I could see the scrub room behind him. Pull up the most recent one, Rachel said. The video thumbnail, not the call log. Can you see it? Yes. Tell me what you see in the background. Be specific. I enlarged the thumbnail. Grant's face tired and warm the way it always looked after surgery. Behind him, pale blue walls, a metal shelf and equipment rack. A clock on the wall reading 11:42. Blue walls, I said. Medical shelving, a clock. It looks like a scrub room. Does the clock have a second hand visible? I leaned closer to the screen. Yes. Is it moving in the video or is it still? My chest went cold. I opened the actual video file and let it play. Grant's mouth moved. His hands gestured. The equipment rack held steady, and the second hand on the clock behind him did not move. Not once. Not in 47 seconds of footage. It is not moving, I said, and my voice came out barely above a whisper. That is a deepfake overlay, Rachel said with the calm of someone delivering a weather forecast. The background is a still image composited onto live footage. It is not sophisticated work. Whoever built it was good enough to fool a tired spouse, but not a frame analysis. He was not in that room, Mrs. Whitmore. He was somewhere else entirely, filming himself against a green screen or a plain wall, and the background was added in post. The room tilted. I pressed one hand flat on Grant's desk to steady myself, and I felt the humiliation of it move through me like something physical, a heat that started in my face and traveled all the way down, shame and fury arriving together, inseparable, impossible to rank. He looked me in the eye, I said. Every single time. He looked right at me and said he was tired and asked how my day was and told me to sleep well. I know, Rachel said, and she said it gently, which somehow made it worse. Can you trace where he actually was? I asked. My jaw ached from holding it tight. If you can give me access to the device metadata, yes, give me 24 hours. You have 12, I said. I ended the call. I sat back in Grant's chair, his chair at his desk, in his carefully ordered office, and I breathed through the burning behind my eyes until it receded enough that I could see the screen clearly again. Then I noticed the folder. It was not on the desktop. It was buried inside 3 layers of nested system utility directories, the kind a non-technical user would never navigate to deliberately. The label was a string of numbers that meant nothing at first glance. He had been careful enough to hide it from anyone who was not looking. Not careful enough to hide it from someone who was. I almost missed it. But something about the name, too random, too deliberately unreadable, made me pause. I double-clicked. Inside were 17 video files. I opened the first one. The room on the screen was not a scrub room. It was not anywhere in our home. The walls were concrete. The lighting was industrial. There was medical equipment I did not recognize arranged along one wall. And in the center of the frame, a reclining chair that looked like something between a surgical table and a throne. I did not understand what I was looking at. I was not meant to. My throat tightened. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. What is this room? I said out loud. Nobody answered, but I was already writing down the file names. He gave me a mirror for our anniversary, 5th year. He said he had handpicked it himself, that he had spent 3 weekends searching for exactly the right piece. Italian 19th century gilded walnut frame, beveled glass. I had hung it on the bedroom wall and admired it every morning for 4 years, without once questioning why a man who normally delegated every personal errand to his assistant had taken such particular care with this one gift. The security expert Julian sent found the camera inside it in 11 minutes. His name was Marcus, and he arrived at 7 in the morning, carrying 2 equipment cases and the polished efficiency of a man who had done this in far more powerful homes than mine. He was not what I expected. He was quiet, methodical, and he did not comment on what he found with anything more than a series of careful notations in a small leather notebook. Before I begin, he said, setting his cases on the kitchen counter. I need you to behave exactly as you normally would. Move through the house the way you always do. Do not look at the walls. I understand, I said. If there are devices present, they will be monitoring for behavioral changes. If you start examining rooms differently, whoever is watching will know something has shifted. He met my eyes. Can you do that? I spent 30 years learning to show people exactly what they expect to see, I said. Yes, I can do that. He nodded, opened his first case, and began. I made coffee. I reviewed my morning emails. I stood at the kitchen window with my cup and looked out at the city the way I always did. While behind me, Marcus moved through the room in slow, deliberate sweeps with equipment I did not recognize. The coffee tasted like nothing. My pulse was doing something irregular that I could feel in my throat, but my hands were steady and my face was composed, and if there was a camera watching me at that moment, it would have seen a woman at the beginning of a perfectly ordinary Wednesday. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later. He held up 4 fingers. 4 devices, all ready. And he had only covered the kitchen and the living room. I set my coffee cup down very carefully. My chest felt like something was sitting on it, heavy and precise and getting heavier. Continue, I said, keeping my voice level. He found 2 more in the master bedroom, one embedded in the anniversary mirror, one concealed inside the base of the smart lamp on Grant's nightstand. In the home office where I worked, there was a third, hidden behind the decorative panel of the espresso machine Grant had given me for my birthday 2 years ago. And in the entrance hallway, tucked inside the casing of a jewelry armoire, he had surprised me with on a random Tuesday, claiming he had seen it and thought of me there was a GPS tracker no larger than a button. Marcus laid them all out on the dining table, 6 devices in total, arranged in a neat row like evidence at a trial, which was exactly what they were. How long? I asked. He consulted his notebook. The mirror device is the oldest. Based on the model and the firmware version, I would estimate it has been operational for approximately 4 years. 4 years. I pulled out a chair and sat down, not because I needed to, but because my legs had made the decision independently. I pressed both hands flat on the table and stared at the devices, and thought about 4 years of mornings getting dressed in front of that mirror. 4 years of conversations in that bedroom. 4 years of believing that my home was the one place in the world where I did not have to perform. He was not watching from the outside. I said more to myself than to Marcus. He was watching from inside the house, while he was away. He was not afraid I was cheating on him. My voice dropped. He was watching to see if I was starting to figure it out. That would be consistent with the placement, Marcus said carefully. The devices are oriented toward areas of activity and conversation, not toward entry points. Whoever installed them was monitoring behavior, not security. Something moved through me. Then not quite rage, not quite grief. Something that existed in the space between them, vast and burning and looking for somewhere to go. I had spent 4 years believing this man was working late, saving lives, and he had spent 4 years watching me through cameras built into the gifts he gave me, making sure I was not getting too close to the truth. He had built a cage around me and called it a home. I stood up. I walked slowly around the table, picking up each device, examining it, setting it back down. Marcus watched me without speaking. Leave them, I said finally. He blinked. I'm sorry. Do not remove them, I said. Not a single one. Leave everything exactly where it is. Mrs. Whitmore, if these devices are transmitting, then let them transmit, I said. He wants to watch me good. I will give him exactly what he needs to see. I looked at Marcus directly. Can you tell me whether the transmissions are live or recorded? The mirror unit appears to be live feed. The others are motion triggered and upload to a cloud server on a delay. So he is watching the mirror in real time. Likely yes. Then I need you to pack your cases, I said, and leave through the service entrance the way you came in. And I need you to do it before I walk back into that bedroom. He studied me for a moment, then nodded with the professional respect of a man who understood that he had just been dismissed by someone who knew what she was doing. I waited until I heard the service door close. Then I walked back into the bedroom. I stood in front of the anniversary mirror, my 4th year, my 19th century gilded frame, my husband's most careful lie, and I looked directly into the glass. My hair was down. I was wearing the silk robe Grant had bought me in Paris. I looked from the outside, like a woman who did not know a thing. I let a small, unhurried smile move across my face. Good, I thought, looking into the lens I now knew was watching me from behind the glass. Now you will see exactly what I want you to see. I turned away from the mirror and began getting dressed for work calmly, deliberately, as though the morning were entirely my own. It just took him a while to understand that. For 10 years I blamed my body. 10 years of consultations, of hushed conversations in beige waiting rooms of doctors who used words like unexplained and idiopathic, and we simply do not know yet, while I sat across from them in my best clothes, trying to look like a woman who was handling things. 10 years of Grant squeezing my hand on the drive home, saying the right things in the right tone. It will happen when it is meant to. We have each other, that is enough, while I stared out the car window and tried to believe him. I had believed him. That was the part I could not yet bring myself to examine directly, not the betrayal itself, but the believing. The specific, sustained, decade-long act of trusting a man who had decided somewhere in the architecture of his own ambition that my body was a variable he needed to control. The answer had been in the orange pill bottle on my nightstand the entire time. Julian had arranged the appointment at a private clinic on the Upper East Side, a facility that did not appear in any online directory, and whose waiting room had no receptionist's window, just a low sofa, a potted orchid, and the particular stillness of a place where powerful people came to learn things they did not want the world to know. He was seated in the corner when I arrived, tie-loosened laptop closed on his knee, and he stood immediately when he saw my face. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Ask me in an hour," I said. He nodded and sat back down without pressing further. That was Julian. He always understood precisely how much space to give and when. He had been doing it for 11 years, giving me exactly the room I needed, without ever making me feel the weight of the gift. I had taken it for granted in the way you take for granted the things that are simply always there. I was beginning to understand that nothing simply always there comes without cost to the person providing it. The doctor's name was Dr. Anita Shaw, and she had the kind of precise, unhurried manner that told you she had delivered difficult news before and had learned to do it without flinching. She brought me into a consultation room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and fresh paper, gestured to the chair across from her desk, and placed a thin folder between us. "I received the sample analysis back this morning," she said. "I want to walk you through it carefully." "Please," I said. My hands were folded in my lap. I pressed them together hard to keep them still. She opened the folder. "The capsules you brought me are not multivitamins. They contain a compound used in hormonal suppression therapy, specifically a high-dose progesterone and estrogen antagonist combination. In the quantities present in each capsule taken daily, this compound would significantly inhibit ovulation." She paused, letting each word land fully before adding the next. "Consistently, reliably, over an extended period." The room did not spin. I had expected the room to spin. Instead, everything went very still, the way it does right before something breaks, that half-second of perfect silence before the glass hits the floor. "How long?" I asked. My voice came out barely above a whisper. If someone had been taking these daily for 10 years, what would the cumulative effect be? Dr. Shaw's expression shifted into something I could not fully name. Not pity, exactly. Something more like sorrow on behalf of the medical profession itself, the particular grief of a physician confronting damage that should never have been allowed to accumulate. "Near complete suppression of natural ovulation for the duration of use," she said. "In some cases, prolonged use of compounds at this dosage can cause lasting changes to the endocrine system. The reversibility depends on the individual." The word reversibility landed somewhere in the center of my chest and exploded outward. I pressed one hand flat against my sternum, as if I could physically hold the feeling in place, as if the right amount of pressure applied to the right location could keep the thing inside from getting out before I was ready for it. 10 years. 10 years of being told my body was the problem. 10 years of tests and supplements and fertility specialists, and the particular grief of a woman who wants a child and cannot understand why her body will not cooperate. 10 years of sitting in waiting rooms, very much like this one, beige walls, careful lighting, the smell of something antiseptic beneath something floral, and being told variations of, "We simply do not know," while I nodded and thanked the doctors, and walked back out into the city and told myself that next time would be different. 10 years of Grant sitting across from those same doctors with me, nodding along, holding my hand in his warm and steady surgeon's grip, expressing exactly the right measure of shared disappointment. "We'll keep trying. These things take time. You are not alone in this." The performance had been so precise, so sustained, so perfectly calibrated to what a grieving wife needed to hear, that I had never once considered the possibility that he already knew the answer because he had written it himself. He had been the one prescribing the capsules. He had handed them to me every morning with a glass of water and a kiss on the forehead and the words, "Don't forget your vitamins, sweetheart." His voice warm with the particular tenderness of a man taking care of his wife. I had thanked him. Some mornings I had thanked him. Something tore open in my chest, not slowly, not gently, but all at once, the way a wound reopens when you move too quickly, and the thing you thought had healed reveals that it was only waiting. My eyes filled so fast I could not blink it back. One tear ran down my left cheek before I could stop it, and then another, and I pressed my hand over my mouth so hard my teeth cut into the inside of my lip because I would not make a sound. I would not give this moment more than it had already taken. "Mrs. Whitmore," Dr. Shaw said, and her voice had gone very quiet. "I am so sorry." "Don't," I said. The word came out harder than I intended. "Please, not yet, just give me a moment." She gave it to me without comment. That was its own kind of kindness. I breathed through it. I counted. I pressed my fingertips against my eyes and pushed until the pressure behind them subsided into something manageable. The children I had mourned without knowing I was mourning them. The mornings I had stared at negative tests and told myself it simply was not time. The grief I had carried for a decade and called my own failure had folded into the fabric of who I understood myself to be, had let it make me quieter and more careful and more grateful for what I had, because at least I had Grant. At least I had that. It had never been my failure. It had been his design. "The children I never had," I said to no one in particular. My voice cracked cleanly on the last word. "He took them. He took them." Dr. Shaw did not offer empty reassurances. She reached across the desk and placed a single hand over mine, and the warmth of that gesture, unexpected, human, uncomplicated, made my throat close completely for several seconds. I sat with it. I let it be what it was, one person acknowledging to another that something irreversible had happened, and that no amount of clinical language would make it smaller. Then I straightened. I pulled myself back together piece by piece, the way you do when you have no other option, and the work is still waiting and falling apart is a luxury you have not yet earned. When I walked back into the waiting room, Julian took one look at my face and was on his feet before I reached him. "Sloane." He caught my arm gently, his grip careful and steady. "What did she find?" "The vitamins," I said. My voice was still unsteady at the edges. I could hear it, that faint fracture beneath the words. "They were not vitamins." His jaw tightened. Something moved across his face. Not just concern, not just the professional alarm of a lawyer absorbing new information, but a fury he was visibly working to contain on my behalf. The controlled, deliberate kind that burns cleaner and longer than anything loud. "He was giving you hormonal suppressants," I said. "Every morning, for 10 years. Julian made a sound low in his throat, the kind a person makes when words are genuinely insufficient, and anything they could say would be smaller than the thing it was trying to address, and his hand tightened on my arm. "Sloane, Not here," I said. "Not yet." I straightened my spine. I lifted my chin. "There is one more thing I need to do first." I sat down on the low sofa, placed the folder of reassembled paper strips from Vera's trash bag on my knee, and began fitting the remaining fragments together with hands that would not quite stop trembling. The last piece clicked into place. 2 characters, 1 number. printed in a clean medical font at the top of what appeared to be a clinical dosage log, with dates and quantities recorded in Grant's own handwriting. X-14. I looked at it for a long moment at the neat, precise lettering, at the dates running down the left margin in Grant's characteristic hand, at the dosage column that told me exactly how long and how carefully and how completely this had been planned. Then I looked up at Julian, who was reading over my shoulder, his face pale in a way I had never seen before. "Tell me everything you know about this compound," I said. His expression told me everything before he opened his mouth. "Nothing good," he said. "X-14 is not something you can find in any pharmacy." Julian told me this sitting across from his desk at 10 minutes past 9 in the evening with a medical reference file open on his screen and both of his hands wrapped tightly around a coffee mug he had not once brought to his lips. The office around us was dark except for the desk lamp throwing everything beyond its circle into shadow, the bookshelves, the framed degrees on the wall, the city outside the window that looked from this distance and at this hour, very far away from anything that was happening inside this room. I have been in this office many times over the years. I knew the particular quality of its quiet, the way sound from the street below arrived muffled and rearranged, the way the desk lamp made everything within its reach look more serious than it might otherwise. Julian's office was the kind of room where things got decided. I had always found that steadying. Tonight it felt like something else entirely. "It is a synthetic neurotoxic compound," he said, his voice carefully controlled in the way it gets when he is furious, and choosing precision over volume when the anger is too large to be useful, and he has made the deliberate decision to compress it into something that can actually do work. Originally developed for use in specific neurological research, extremely restricted access requires a DEA Schedule II license minimum and in most states, additional institutional oversight. He paused, his eyes still on the screen. "Grant has all of those credentials." "What does it do?" I asked. He looked up then. He met my eyes with the directness of someone who has decided that softening the answer would be its own kind of cruelty. "At low doses administered consistently over time, it mimics the symptoms of chronic stress syndrome and nervous system fatigue," he said. "Cognitive fog, persistent exhaustion, occasional disorientation, appetite fluctuation." Another pause longer than the first. "Sloan, have you been experiencing any of those symptoms?" The air went out of me so completely that for a moment I could not locate my next breath. For 18 months I had been telling my own physician that I was simply working too hard, that the fatigue was the fund quarter-end pressure, the weight of managing capital at scale, the cumulative cost of decisions made at velocity, that the mornings when I could not quite find a word that should have arrived instantly were just the inevitable friction of running a billion-dollar operation before most people had finished their coffee. My doctor had listened carefully and told me to sleep more, take magnesium, reduce my caffeine intake, consider whether I was giving myself adequate recovery time between high-stress periods. I had thanked him. I had implemented half his suggestions. I had assumed, because I had always assumed, that the problem was mine to solve, that if I simply managed myself better, rested, more strategically, protected my hours with greater discipline, the fog would lift and I would return to the version of myself that had never needed to work this hard just to feel like herself. "All of them," I said, "for over a year." Julian set the coffee mug down on the desk. He pressed the heel of his hand briefly against his forehead, a gesture I had seen from him perhaps twice in 11 years, the specific gesture of a man absorbing something that has briefly exceeded his capacity to process it cleanly. When he lowered his hand, what was in his expression was not just anger on my behalf. It was something rawer than that. Something that looked like the particular fear of a person who has just understood how close something came. "He was dosing you," Julian said. Each word is placed with the careful weight of someone who understands that saying a thing plainly is its own form of respect for the person hearing it. "Gradually increase the concentration over time to avoid triggering alarm." "The document you found, the X-14 log in his handwriting, those are not research notes, those are dosage records." He held my gaze. "That is a poisoning schedule." I sat with that for a moment. Let the specific combination of those two words, poisoning schedule, exist in the room between us, without flinching away from them, because flinching was what he had counted on. Grant had built his entire plan on the assumption that I would be too exhausted, too confused, too busy blaming myself to look clearly at what was being done to me. I was looking now. My phone buzzed on the desk between us. Vera's name on the screen. I put her on speaker immediately. Vera, you are on with Julian. I know you asked me to track his routines. Her voice was tight-clipped, the voice of a woman holding herself together with the specific effort of someone who has been holding herself together for longer than she should have had to. I need to tell you something I should have told you sooner. Tell me now, I said. I timed it tonight. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, as though even alone, wherever she was afraid of being overheard. 6 minutes. Exactly 6 minutes, the same sequence every single night. I stood in the hallway and I counted. Miss Sloane, he adds something to that glass before he brings it to you. I saw him take a small bottle from the inside pocket of his jacket. He put it back before he left the kitchen. I did not see the label. A breath that was almost steady. But I saw his hands. My own throat burned. Vera, you could not have known. I should have questioned it, she said, and I could hear tears in her words now, thick and genuine, and carrying the specific weight of someone who has been replaying a sequence of events and finding at every turn the moment where a different choice might have changed things. A man who cannot boil water for his own breakfast, and he insists on preparing your milk every night by himself, and he is very particular about it, and he does not allow anyone else in the kitchen during that time. I thought it was... Her voice caught. I thought it was love. I thought it was one of the things he did because he loved you. You are helping me now, I said. That is what matters. Go home. Lock your door. Do not let him know we have spoken. Yes, Miss Sloane. A shaking breath, the kind that comes at the end of something rather than the beginning. Please be careful. The call ended. I looked at Julian. Julian looked at me. And for a moment the weight of what Vera had just confirmed pressed down on the room like something with physical mass. Every tender good night, every warm glass waiting on my nightstand. Every morning I had woken up a fraction more exhausted than the night before and told myself it was the work. It was the quarter. It was the cost of caring too much about things that mattered. Every night he kissed my forehead, and every night before he did he had poisoned me. I want to break something, I said. My voice came out very even steadier than anything I was feeling, which was itself a kind of muscle memory, the years of training that let the surface hold regardless of what was happening beneath it. I want to put my hands through this wall. I want to scream until my throat gives out and keep going after that. I know, Julian said. But I am not going to, I said, because that is exactly what he would expect. He has spent 18 months engineering a version of me that falls apart. I am not going to give him the satisfaction of being right about that, too. Something shifted in Julian's expression, not relief exactly, but the specific quality of attention that arrives when someone you have been watching carefully reveals that they are still, despite everything, exactly who you knew them to be. He leaned forward. We need Dr. Miller. He is the one who prescribed and sourced the X-14. Without him, we cannot establish a chain of custody in court. The dosage log is evidence of intent, but Miller is the link that connects the compound to Grant's actions. Without him, a competent defense attorney turns the log into a document of unknown origin and reasonable doubt does the rest. I know, I said. I have been trying to reach him through his clinic, Julian said. His assistant says he is on an indefinite leave of absence. No forwarding contact, no scheduled return. He set his pen down. I need another 48 hours to locate him. You have 12, I said. He looked at me. His DEA registration lists a secondary practice address on East 71st Street, I said. It is not the clinic. It is a private consultation suite, separate registration, different billing entity. The letterhead is printed at the top of every page of that dosage log. His name, his credentials, the address. I held Julian's gaze. It took me 4 minutes to find it. Julian picked up his pen slowly. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, not in this room, not tonight, but the closest thing to it that the moment would allow. The specific expression of a man who has just remembered with something that felt like relief, exactly who he was dealing with. East 71st, he said, writing it down. East 71st, I confirmed. He wrote. I watched the city lights beyond the window, distant and indifferent, and thought about a man on leave who had not gone far enough. Nobody ever did. Nobody. My husband was a brilliant surgeon. It turned out he was a terrible money launderer. I discovered this on a Thursday morning sitting at the head of the conference table in Blackwood Capital's private analysis room, with 4 screens open, a pot of coffee that no one was touching, and my CFO Daniel Reese seated to my right with the expression of a man who had found something in the numbers that he very much wished he had not. I had seen that expression on Daniel's face twice before, in 6 years, once during the 2019 liquidity event that briefly threatened our largest position, and once when a junior analyst had made an error that cost the fund 11 minutes of trading exposure. Both times Daniel had walked into my office, set a document on my desk, and delivered the information with the flat, precise economy of someone who understood that bad news does not improve with packaging. He was meticulous, loyal, and constitutionally incapable of softening what needed to be said, which was precisely why I had hired him the week I opened Blackwood Capital's doors, and why I had never once considered replacing him. He placed a printed summary on the table between us and pointed to the top line without preamble. Someone moved $150 million out of the Whitmore joint investment portfolio over the past 22 months, he said. Not all at once. Small transfers, irregular intervals, different originating accounts. Whoever structured this was trying to avoid automated flagging. But you found it, I said. I find everything eventually, he said flatly. The question is where it went. He clicked to the next slide. A flowchart filled the screen, 7 company names connected by arrows, each one feeding into the next like a set of nested boxes, designed to exhaust whoever tried to follow the trail. I had seen structures like this before in due diligence reviews, for acquisition targets, in the occasional regulatory filing that arrived with more complexity than its subject warranted. I knew what they meant. They meant that someone had paid a great deal of careful attention to making something very difficult to trace. 7 shell companies, Daniel said, all registered in Delaware, all incorporated within the last 3 years, all with the same registered agent, and 0 verifiable business activity. Grant Whitmore is not named in any of them directly. He paused. But they all flow into a single LLC at the bottom of the chain. What is an LLC? I asked. Daniel pressed his lips together briefly before answering the half-second pause of a man who has rehearsed the delivery of a particular piece of information and is confirming one final time that he has the words right. Claris Holdings. I registered 18 months ago, single member. He turned to look at me directly. The member of record is Clara Weston. The room did not change. The screens kept glowing. The coffee kept cooling. The city outside the windows continued its indifferent Thursday morning without any acknowledgement of the fact that something in my chest had simply stopped moving. Not broken, not collapsed, but stopped, the way a clock stops when the mechanism encounters something it was not built to absorb. Clara Weston, my mother. Say that again, I said very quietly. Clara Weston, Daniel repeated. He had the good sense to say nothing else. He had worked with me long enough to understand the difference between the silence that wants to be filled and the silence that needs to be left alone. I stood up from the table. I walked to the window and stood there with both hands at my sides and looked out at Manhattan, 40 floors below, at the grid of it, the movement, the specific indifference of a city that processes everything and records nothing. The woman who had held my hand at my father's funeral, who had sat in the front row at my Harvard graduation with tears on her face that I had believed for 25 years were tears of pride, who called every Sunday at 7 o'clock without fail, her voice warm and familiar, asking about the fund and my health and whether I was eating properly, asking about Grant with a particular warmth I had always attributed to genuine affection for a son-in-law who treated her daughter well. She had signed her name to a financial structure designed to drain $150 million from an account that also bore mine. She had not been tricked into it. She had not been coerced. Her name was on the registration documents as the single member of record, which meant she had appeared before a notary and identified herself, and signed with full knowledge of what she was signing. She had chosen this. She had chosen him. How much of this would Sloane have been liable for? I asked, using my own name the way you do when you need a degree of distance from yourself, when the thing you are describing is too close to be looked at directly, and you need the slight remove of the third person to see it clearly. If the SEC had flagged these transfers before we found them, Daniel's pause was its own answer. Enough to warrant a federal investigation, he said carefully. Joint portfolio. Her signature appears on the originating account documentation. She would have been the named primary holder of record. I turned from the window. The city behind me kept moving. I let it. He was going to make me a criminal, I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, not because they surprised me not anymore, but because saying them out loud completed a transformation that had been building since the Hilton lobby 11 days ago. They moved the thing from a fear I was managing into a fact I could fight. He was going to drain the portfolio, leave my name on every account that touched it, and walk away. It appears that way, yes. And my mother helped him build the exit structure. Daniel did not answer. There was nothing useful he could say, and he understood that, and I was grateful for it. I thought about Clara then, not the version I had carried in my mind for 30 years out of duty and love, and the specific loyalty of a daughter who had decided very early that whatever her mother withheld was something she simply had to earn. I thought about the actual woman, the way she had always looked at Jade with a softness she never quite managed with me. A warmth that arrived fully formed, unearned, simply present the way warmth is supposed to be. The way she had welcomed Grant into the family with an enthusiasm that I had attributed to relief, to the comfort of seeing her older daughter settled and loved. The way she had, over years of Sunday calls and holiday dinners, occasionally said things that landed like small, precise knives. "You are so like your father Sloane," not as a compliment, but as a verdict delivered with a smile that made it impossible to respond to directly. She had not been protecting anyone. She had been positioning herself. For years, quietly and completely, she had been choosing the side she intended to be on when this ended. My eyes did not sting with grief. I had moved past grief for Clara somewhere in the space between the window and the table. What burned behind them was colder and more specific, the particular pain of a person who has spent 30 years trying to earn something from someone who had already decided at a point too far back to identify that it was simply not available to her. I had built a fund. I had graced covers. I had called every Sunday and come home for every holiday, and never once said directly how much the distance cost me. Because I had always believed that if I was simply enough, successful enough, useful enough, present enough, the distance would eventually close. It was not going to close. It had never been going to close. And standing at the window of my own conference room with Daniel's printed summary on the table behind me, I finally let that be true without trying to revise it into something more bearable. "Pull everything," I told Daniel. "Every transfer, every company filing, every piece of documentation connecting Claire's holdings to the joint portfolio. I need it organized by date and ready for legal review by the end of day." "Already in progress," he said. "And Daniel." I stopped at the door. "This conversation does not leave this room." "Of course," he said. He had never once needed to be told that. I walked back to my office. I sat at my desk. I picked up my phone and scrolled to my mother's contact and stared at her name for a long moment at the word Mom, above the number at the small photograph I had set as her contact image 2 years ago. Clara at a garden party, laughing at something off camera, looking in that moment like a woman without a complicated thought in her head. Then I pressed the call. She answered on the third ring, warm, and entirely unsuspecting. "Sloan, darling, what a nice surprise." "Hi, Mom," I said, and my voice came out perfectly steady, perfectly warm, perfectly ordinary, the voice of a daughter who had simply called to suggest dinner. "I was thinking Sunday, just the two of us. I feel like we have not had a proper catch-up in ages." "Oh, I would love that," she said, and she sounded genuinely pleased, which was the most complicated thing I had heard all morning. "Perfect," I said. "I will make the reservation." I ended the call. I set the phone face down on the desk. Then I opened Julian's contact and typed 4 words. "Clara is involved. Everything." Julian had been in love with me for 11 years. He had never said it directly. He did not need to. He showed it the same way he showed everything that mattered to him, not with words, but with the quality of his attention. I arrived at his office just after 10 in the evening, still in my work clothes with my phone in my hand, and Clara's voice still faintly echoing in my memory. "I would love that, darling." Julian was waiting at his desk with 3 legal pads covered in handwriting, 2 open laptops, and the focused, slightly disheveled energy of a man who had been working without stopping since I had sent him 4 words 6 hours ago. He looked up when I walked in and something moved across his face. Relief first, then concern, then something he quickly rearranged into professionalism. "Sit down," he said. "I have been building something." I sat. He turned one of the legal pads toward me and began. "3 layers," he said, pressing his pen to the first page. "We run them simultaneously, which is unconventional, but in this case, it is the only way to ensure he cannot neutralize one without walking into another." He tapped the first line. "Criminal. Attempted murder by poisoning X. 14 the dosage log in his handwriting. Vera's testimony, Dr. Shaw's analysis. That goes to the FBI, not local law enforcement. Federal jurisdiction is cleaner." "And Dr. Miller?" I asked. "That is what the second layer depends on." Julian's expression tightened. "He is the one who sourced the X14 and wrote the prescriptions. Without him, we have circumstantial evidence. With him, we have a complete chain of custody. I have located him. He is still practicing Upper East Side, but he is going to need significant incentive to come forward." "What kind of incentive?" "Immunity. Full prosecutorial immunity in exchange for testimony." Julian set his pen down. "I spoke to a contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office this afternoon. Unofficially. She says they will consider it if the underlying case is as solid as I am describing." "It is solid," I said. "It is ironclad." "I know." He almost smiled. "I trained you." "You did not train me," I said. "You just gave me better problems to solve." He did smile at that briefly warmly, and then the smile faded back into focus as he turned to the second legal pad. "Civil layer. The financial fraud, the shell companies, Clara's holdings, Clara's involvement. This is where Daniel's documentation becomes crucial. We file for full asset discovery in the divorce proceeding simultaneously, which freezes everything before Grant or Clara can move anything further." "And the divorce itself?" I asked. "Third layer. I want to file within 48 hours of the criminal referral. The moment he is under federal investigation, his ability to contest the financial terms becomes significantly compromised." He looked at me over the legal pad. "Sloan. He is going to lose everything. The institute, the practice, the assets, the reputation, all of it." "Good," I said. Julian set the pad down. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me in a way that was different from his lawyer looking at client way. Quieter, more direct, the way he had looked at me exactly once before the night my father died, and he had sat with me in this same office for 4 hours without once checking his phone. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can always ask me something." "How are you actually doing?" he said. "Not strategically, not legally, how are you doing?" The question landed somewhere unexpected. I had been moving so fast for so long, gathering, analyzing, constructing, that I had not stopped to locate myself inside any of it. I found when I tried to answer that my throat had tightened in a way I had not anticipated. "I do not know yet," I said honestly. "I think I am saving that for later." "You do not have to save everything for later," Julian said quietly. "Julian, I am not trying to—" He stopped, started again. He pressed his hands flat on the desk, and I could see the effort it took him to choose the next words carefully. "I have watched you carry things alone for as long as I have known you. I watched you carry the infertility. I watched you carry the fund through 2 market crises without telling anyone how frightened you were. I watched you walk into this office tonight after finding out your mother conspired against you, and the first thing you did was ask about the legal strategy. His voice had dropped. There was something raw at the edges of it now, something he was not entirely succeeding at keeping contained. Why are you doing all of this? I asked. The hours, the unofficial calls, the 3 legal pads. Julian, this is beyond. Because you deserve someone in your corner who is not going to leave when it gets complicated, he said. His jaw was tight. His eyes were very direct. Because you are the only person I have ever met who fights smarter than she hurts. And because he stopped himself, pulled back, picked up his pen again. Because that is what I am here for. The room held that moment between us for several seconds. My heart was doing something it had not done in a very long time, not breaking, not clenching, but something gentler and more frightening than either. Then my phone buzzed on the desk between us. An unknown number, no contact name, 7 words on the screen. Stop digging, you don't know what you're stepping into. I picked it up. I looked at the number. The area code prefix was familiar, the same exchange that covered a 10-block radius on the Upper East Side. The same 10 blocks where my mother lived. I looked up at Julian. He had already seen it. She knows we are moving, he said. Or someone told her we are, I said. I set the phone face down on the desk. My hands were perfectly steady. But somewhere in the center of my chest, something had shifted from warm back to cold as cleanly and completely as a door clicking shut. Tell me about Dr. Miller, I said. Everything. My mother's brownstone on East 74th Street smelled the same way it always had, gardenias and old wood, and something faintly medicinal, the smell of a house maintained with great care and lived in with very little warmth. Clara Weston opened the door before I could ring the bell. She was dressed beautifully as always, a cashmere wrap in pale gray pearl earrings, hair swept back with the practiced elegance of a woman who had spent decades understanding that appearance was its own form of power. She smiled when she saw me, and the smile reached her eyes exactly far enough to be convincing. Darling, she kissed both my cheeks. You look thin. Are you sleeping? I am sleeping fine, I said. You look wonderful, Mom. She ushered me inside with a hand at my elbow, talking lightly about a charity committee meeting she had attended that afternoon, a board appointment at the Metropolitan that was taking more of her time than expected. I followed her through the hallway. I had walked 1,000 times, growing up past the photographs on the wall. Jade at 14, Jade at 18, Jade's gallery opening last fall, and into the dining room, where the table was set for 2 with Clara's best china. There was not a single photograph of me in the hallway. There never had been. I sat down. I unfolded my napkin. I smiled across the candlelight at the woman who had signed her name to a financial structure designed to destroy me, and I told myself, not yet. Not yet. I have been thinking about you so much lately, Clara said, pouring wine with a steady hand. You work far too hard, Sloane. Grant says the same thing. Does he? I said pleasantly. When did you speak to Grant? Something very small, very fast moved across her face. Oh, last week sometime. He called to check in. You know how he is. He worries about you. He does, I agreed. He is very attentive. She relaxed slightly and began serving the first course, a soup she had made herself, which meant she had been anxious enough about this dinner to cook, which told me more than anything she had said so far. We talked about nothing important for 20 minutes. The charity gala in March. A mutual friend's daughter who was getting married in Tuscany. Jade's new apartment in Tribeca, which Clara described with an enthusiasm that filled the entire room. Her hands moving expressively, her eyes bright in a way they never quite managed when she talked about me. Jade's apartment. Purchased, I now knew, with money funneled through Clara's holdings from my joint portfolio. How is the fund? Clara asked with the careful casualness of someone who had rehearsed the question. Very well, I said. Actually, I wanted to ask your advice on something. I reached for my wine glass. We have been reviewing some of our alternative investment holdings, some of the smaller biotech positions. A few of the companies have been underperforming. I am thinking of liquidating certain positions and restructuring. I paused. Are you familiar with any biotech holdings in that space? Grant mentioned you had been exploring some investment opportunities yourself. Clara's hand tightened around the stem of her glass. Just slightly. Just enough. The knuckles went pale for the span of 2 heartbeats before she released the pressure. "Oh, nothing serious," she said smoothly. "Just a few small things. You know I leave the serious investing to experts like you." She laughed. It was a beautiful laugh, warm and practiced and completely hollow. "Of course," I said, and smiled and let the subject drop. After dinner, Clara excused herself to make tea, and I stood and moved slowly through the living room, the way I always did, examining the shelves, the small sculptures, the framed pieces she collected with genuine taste and zero sentiment. I ran my fingers along the edge of the console table by the window. The secondary phone was lying behind a ceramic bowl, half hidden, its screen dark. I did not touch it. I photographed the number visible on the home screen through the bowl's reflection in the mirror above the console, the same Upper East Side prefix, the same 7 digits I had memorized the night the threatening message arrived. My chest felt like something was being slowly compressed inside it. Not grief, I had moved past the stage where Clara's choices still had the power to grieve me. This was colder than grief, more precise. I moved to the hallway and opened the drawer of the small accent table near the stairs. The one Clara had always told me contained nothing but old receipts and spare keys. My fingers found a photograph face down beneath a rubber band and an old Christmas card. I turned it over. My father's face looked back at me. He was young in the photograph, younger than I had ever known him, standing in front of a building I did not recognize, laughing with his whole face, in the uninhibited way he had that Clara had always described as too much. Always too much. He looked, I realized with a start, that moved through me like cold water. Remarkably like me. The same jaw. The same way of standing straight and forward as if already measuring whatever came next. I turned the photograph over and placed it back exactly as I had found it. Clara came back with the tea on a silver tray, and we sat together for another 40 minutes, and she told me about Jade's new art project and the renovation she was planning for the guest room, and I listened and nodded and asked questions and felt the shape of everything I now knew rearrange itself into something clear and hard and permanent. She had not helped Grant hollow out my life because she loved Jade more. She had done it because every single time she looked at me, she saw the man she had spent 30 years learning to resent, the man who had loved his eldest daughter with a completeness that Clara had never known how to replicate and had never forgiven either of us for. I had spent my entire childhood trying to earn something she had already decided I would never receive. At the door, she kissed my cheek again and said, "Do this more often, darling. I miss you." "I will," I said. I walked down the front steps and did not look back. My jaw ached, my eyes were dry, and somewhere in my coat pocket my phone held a photograph of a number that connected my mother to a threat she believed had frightened me into stopping. She had made her choice, I had made mine, and now I had proof of both. The cameras were still watching, so I gave them exactly what Grant needed to see. It began with the milk. Every evening, Grant set a warm glass on my nightstand at precisely 9:30, a ritual he had maintained for years, with a tenderness I had once found moving. I knew now what was in it. I knew the compound, the dosage, the cumulative effect on my nervous system. I knew all of it. And every night I picked up the glass, brought it to my lips, took a small, visible sip, set it down with a grateful smile, and the moment his footsteps retreated down the hallway, I poured the rest into the small watering can Vera had placed beside the bedroom potted plant. The plant notably was doing very poorly. Vera and I had worked out our system over 3 careful conversations held in the building's service stairwell, where there were no cameras. We did not write anything down. We spoke in short sentences and confirmed understanding with a single nod before returning separately to the penthouse, where we resumed our respective performances. Vera, the loyal housekeeper; Sloane, the slowly deteriorating wife. "How are you feeling this morning, Miss Sloane?" Vera asked on a Tuesday, carrying a breakfast tray into the bedroom with the careful, practiced concern of a woman who had been watching her employer decline for months. I was standing at the window in my silk robe, and I turned slowly, not dramatically slowly, just enough, and let my hand trail along the window ledge as if steadying myself. "A little foggy," I said. "I did not sleep well." Grant looked up from his phone at the bedroom doorway. His eyes moved over me with an assessment so quick and clinical it made my skin crawl, not the gaze of a husband checking on a wife, but the gaze of a physician monitoring a patient's progression. "You should rest today," he said. "Cancel your morning calls." "I cannot cancel." "Sloane." His voice was gentle, practiced in its concern. "You have been pushing yourself too hard. Your body is telling you to slow down." He believed it. He genuinely, completely believed that the symptoms he had engineered were finally overtaking me, that the compound in my evening milk was doing exactly what he had designed it to do. The satisfaction in his voice was subtle, buried under the performance of husbandly worry, but I had spent 15 years learning to hear what Grant did not say, and I heard it clearly. "You are right," I said. I pressed my fingertips to my temple. "Maybe just the morning." He kissed my forehead before he left. His lips were warm. My hands beneath the duvet were clenched into fists so tight my knuckles had gone white. The moment I heard the elevator close behind him, I sat up straight. The fog vanished from my face. My eyes sharpened. Vera, who was collecting the breakfast tray, caught my gaze and allowed herself a single small exhale of relief that she had been holding since Grant appeared in the doorway. "He bought it," she said quietly. "He bought all of it," I said. I threw back the duvet and got up with the energy of a woman who had slept 8 hours and taken no poison whatsoever. "What did you find last night?" "He made a phone call from the car," Vera said, keeping her voice low even though we were alone. "I heard him on the parking level before he pulled out. I could not catch all of it, but I heard him say faster than I expected and something about a timeline moving up. Something cold moved through my chest. Not fear calculation. If he was telling someone the timeline was accelerating, that meant he believed I was deteriorating ahead of schedule, which meant he would move his plan forward, which meant we had less time than Julian's 14-day estimate. I picked up my phone and called Julian immediately. He answered on the first ring. "Grant thinks it is moving faster," I said, pulling on clothes with my phone wedged between my shoulder and my ear. "He made a call this morning. Vera overheard. He said the timeline is moving up." "How much faster?" Julian's voice was immediately alert, the easy warmth gone, replaced by the sharp focus I relied on. "I do not know. Days, maybe." "Then I need to tell you something." A brief pause. "Dr. Miller called me this morning, 40 minutes ago. He wants to meet." I stopped moving. "He reached out to you." "He reached out to me," Julian confirmed, and there was a controlled excitement in his voice, the sound of a man watching a critical piece move into position. "He said he wants immunity. He said he wants out. Those were his exact words, 'I want out.' Sloane, he is scared. Whatever Grant told him about the timeline, Miller has heard it too, and he does not want to be standing next to Grant Whitmore when this comes apart." I stood in the center of the bedroom, in one of the most expensive buildings in Manhattan, surrounded by cameras my husband had installed in gifts he had given me with his own hands, and I felt something rise in my chest that I could only describe as the opposite of everything I had been performing for the past week. Not weakness, not fog, not decline. Power. Quiet, absolute, and entirely my own. "Set the meeting," I said. "Tomorrow. Somewhere neutral. And Julian." I looked directly at the camera hidden behind the anniversary mirror, and I let myself smile just slightly, just enough. "Tell him he made the right call. He thought he was watching me die. He was watching me build the cage that would hold him. $100 million. That was what my life was worth to them, exactly $100 million payable upon death to the sole beneficiary Grant Whitmore had designated 18 months ago in an update I had signed without reading in a lawyer's office on a Wednesday afternoon when I had 3 conference calls waiting and trusted my husband to handle the paperwork. Dr. Elliot Miller did not look like a man who had been sleeping well. He was seated at the far end of Julian's conference table when I arrived, a slight man in his mid-50s with wire-rimmed glasses, and the particular pallor of someone who had been living with a secret that had grown considerably heavier than he had originally bargained for. His suit was expensive but wrinkled. His hands folded on the table in front of him were not quite steady. When I walked in, he flinched, actually flinched, a small involuntary recoil, as if he had expected someone else, someone worse. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Dr. Miller," I said, and sat down across from him. Julian took the seat beside me, a legal pad in front of him, his expression completely neutral, in the precise way it goes neutral when he is working very hard not to show what he is feeling. "I want to be clear about something before we begin," Dr. Miller said, and his voice was tight with the effort of holding it steady. I did not know at the start what the full scope of his intentions were. He presented it to me as a neurological research project, controlled compound administration for a clinical trial. I had no reason to. Dr. Miller, Julian said, his voice calm but carrying an edge underneath it like a blade under silk. We are not here to negotiate your culpability. We are here to hear what you know. You can tell your version of events to the U.S. Attorney's Office in a separate conversation. Miller pressed his lips together. He nodded. Then he reached into his briefcase and placed a single printed document on the table. He sent me this 4 days ago, he said. Encrypted email through the same channel he used for the X14 prescriptions. I printed it the moment I read it because I needed to hold it. I needed it to be real. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I did not sign up for this. I want you to know that. Whatever else I did not sign up for this. I slid the document toward me and read it. It was brief. 12 lines, clinical in language, catastrophic in meaning. At the top, Grant's private email address. Below it, a date 14 days from today and the words, Final Escalation Protocol. Then a dosage table X, 14 concentration delivery method timing. A note at the bottom that read, Presentation should be consistent with hypertensive stroke event. Durable POA is in place. Proceed as discussed. Durable POA is in place. He had already filed the power of attorney documents. He had already arranged to control every financial decision the moment I was rendered incapacitated. The insurance would pay out upon death. He would present himself to the world as a grieving husband, a brilliant surgeon undone by the devastating loss of his wife, who had simply worked herself into an early grave. Something moved through my body that I could not name. Not fear, because fear implies uncertainty, and there was nothing uncertain about what I was reading. It was something more like the sensation of looking directly at a source of heat. Steady, undeniable, consuming. 14 days, I said. My voice came out flat and clear. He told me the compound administration had been ahead of schedule, Miller said, and now his hands were visibly trembling on the table. He said your symptoms were progressing faster than anticipated. He wanted to move before you had time to. He stopped, swallowed. I am sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. I am genuinely deeply sorry. I know that is worth very little at this point. Julian spoke before I could. It will be worth considerably more if you cooperate fully with federal prosecutors. His voice was controlled, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the deliberate set of his shoulders, the very careful way he was choosing not to look at me, because if he did, the control would slip. You sourced the compound. You wrote the prescriptions. That makes you an accessory to attempted murder, Dr. Miller. The immunity offer is real, but it requires complete and unqualified testimony. I understand, Miller said. His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. I will testify. I will give them everything. The emails, the prescriptions, the conversations, all of it. He pulled off his glasses and pressed his fingers briefly against his eyes. When he put them back on, they were slightly wet. He is going to know it was me. Yes, Julian said, he is. Miller nodded slowly, the nod of a man accepting a consequence he cannot avoid. Then I suppose that is what I deserve. After he left, escorted out through the service entrance by Julian's assistant, Julian, and I sat alone in the conference room. He placed the printed email in a protective sleeve with steady, methodical hands. I watched him do it and thought about 14 days, about a date on a page, about the particular intimacy of someone deciding on a specific Tuesday that you will cease to exist. He gave me a date, I said. He scheduled my death like a board meeting. Julian looked up from the document sleeve. His eyes were very bright, and there was something in them that had nothing to do with legal strategy. Sloan, I am not going to fall apart, I said. My hands were flat on the table. But I need one moment to be furious before I do what comes next. Take it, Julian said quietly. Take as long as you need. I sat with it for exactly 45 seconds. The fury, the cold disbelief, the grief for the version of my life that had contained a man I thought was my partner. I let it exist completely. Then I breathed out and picked up my phone. 14 days is enough, I said. Julian, call the FBI. By the time the FBI field office confirmed the operation the following morning, 13 days remained on Grant's timeline. I intended to use every one of them. The FBI field office on Federal Plaza did not look the way I expected. I had imagined something imposing, all gray concrete and institutional lighting, the architecture of authority. What I found instead was a conference room that smelled of stale coffee and printer toner, with fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly at a frequency designed to make everyone feel slightly more exhausted than they actually were. Special Agent Dana Reyes sat across from me and Julian with a legal pad, a recording device, and the particular brand of focused calm that comes from having heard worse stories than mine before lunch. "Walk me through the timeline from the beginning," she said, uncapping her pen. "All of it. Do not edit for what you think is relevant. Let me make that determination." I walked her through all of it. 22 minutes, no interruptions. When I finished, she looked at Julian. "The email from Dr. Miller," she said. "Is it authenticated?" "Digital forensics confirmed the sender address, timestamp, and encryption signature this morning," Julian said. "It is Grant Whitmore's private account, no dispute." Agent Reyes tapped her pen against the pad twice. "We can get the court order for asset freeze within 48 hours. Criminal investigation basis attempted murder, financial fraud conspiracy. That covers both Whitmore and Clara Weston." She looked at me directly. "Once we execute the order, he will know something has moved. We have a window before that happens." "The wire," I said. "Dr. Miller, can you move on that today? If Miller agrees to cooperate under our terms, we can have him equipped and briefed by this afternoon." She paused. "Mrs. Whitmore, once this begins, it cannot be undone. Are you certain?" I looked at her steadily. "Agent Reyes, the man, has a date scheduled for my death. I am very certain." She nodded. "Then let us get to work." Dr. Miller's hands were shaking so badly that the FBI technician had to ask him twice to hold still while attaching the wire beneath his shirt. I was not in the room for this, Julian had relayed it to me afterward, but I imagined the scene clearly. Miller sitting on a folding chair in a nondescript room, gray-faced and sweating, pressing his palms flat against his thighs, and reminding himself of the immunity agreement sitting signed on the table behind him. "You just have to get him talking," Agent Reyes had told Miller during the briefing. "Ask him about the timeline. He will do the rest. Men like Grant Whitmore always believe they are the smartest person in any room. Use that." Miller had nodded. He had pressed his fingers briefly to his eyes, gathered himself, and said, "I spent 30 years building a reputation in this field. I would like there to be something left of it when this is over." "Then help us," Agent Reyes said. "That is how." The meeting between Miller and Grant took place at the Institute Grant's territory, his domain, the building where he was known and respected and completely at ease. 19 minutes from start to finish. I listened to the audio feed from a laptop in Julian's office, sitting absolutely still with both hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea, Julian beside me with his elbows on the desk and his jaw set hard. Miller's voice came through, first slightly unsteady but holding. "I wanted to touch base on the protocol. The timeline you sent, I want to make sure I am prepared." A pause. Then Grant's voice, warm and measured, the voice I had fallen asleep beside for 15 years. "You are prepared, Elliot. You have been doing this for 30 years. The dosage in the final stage is correct," Grant said, a slight edge entering his tone, the impatience of a precise man being asked to repeat himself. "I sent you the exact specifications, just a few more days, and Miller, make sure the dose is right this time. We do not get a second opportunity." "Make sure the dose is right this time." The words came through the laptop speaker and landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Julian's hand, resting on the desk, curled slowly into a fist. His knuckles went pale. I heard him draw a sharp breath through his nose and hold it. My own reaction was quieter and more dangerous. Something in my chest went very, very cold. Not the coldness of shock, but the coldness of absolute resolution. The last remaining thread of any doubt I might have carried, any fragment of the woman who had once believed in this man, severed itself cleanly and completely, and without ceremony. I set the cold tea down carefully. 40 minutes later, Dr. Miller walked into Julian's office. He was still pale, his collar slightly damp, his tie loosened. He placed the wire recording unit on the desk without speaking, and then, because he was a man who had just done the most difficult thing he had likely ever done, he pressed both hands over his face for several seconds while his shoulders shook. "It is done," he said from behind his hands. "It is all on there, every word." Agent Reyes was standing in the corner of the room. She picked up the device, confirmed the file, and looked at me across the room. She nodded once. 13 days had become irrelevant. We had everything we needed. "There is one thing left," I said, standing. My voice was steady, and my hands were warm, and somewhere in a penthouse 42 floors above the city, a camera was waiting for me to come home and look tired. "I have a performance to give tonight, and Grant Whitmore is going to have the best seat in the house." He came home early that night. I knew he would. I had been waiting for it, lying in the master bedroom with the lamp turned low, and my breathing measured, and my body arranged with the careful imprecision of a woman who had fallen asleep without meaning to. The anniversary mirror glowed faintly on the wall across from me, its hidden lens transmitting everything to a laptop 3 floors below in the building manager's office, where Agent Reyes sat with 2 of her colleagues and Julian watching the feed in real time. I had been lying in that bed for 40 minutes before I heard the elevator, the sound of Grant's key in the lock, the quiet of a man who was trying not to make noise, not out of consideration, but out of precision. He had always moved through the world precisely. That had once struck me as elegant. I understood now that it was the habit of someone who had learned to do things without leaving traces. I closed my eyes. His footsteps crossed the living room. Stopped briefly, I imagined him looking toward the kitchen, checking something satisfying himself. Then the footsteps resumed moving down the hallway, slow and unhurried, the pace of a man who believed he had all the time in the world. The bedroom door opened. He did not turn on the overhead light. He moved to the chair in the corner. I could track him by sound alone, 15 years of knowing exactly how this man occupied a room, and I heard the familiar soft sound of his leather medical bag being set down, the zip of the outer pocket opening, the small, precise sounds of preparation. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I was certain he could hear it. But I was Sloan Whitmore. I had run a billion-dollar fund through 2 market collapses and never let them see me sweat. I lay still. The footsteps crossed toward the bed. I heard him lift the syringe from the bag. I heard the small clinical snap of the cap being removed. And then I opened my eyes. Grant froze. He was standing at the edge of the bed, less than 3 feet from me, in his shirt sleeves, with his jacket draped over the chair, holding a syringe in his right hand, with the practiced grip of a surgeon who had performed this motion 10,000 times in his career. His face, when my eyes found his, went through 3 distinct expressions in less rapid succession than he would have liked: shock, then recalculation, then the beginning of something that wanted to be recovery. He did not recover. "Looking for this," I said. I sat up and opened my left hand. Lying across my palm was an identical syringe, same model, same label. Empty. Agent Reyes had walked Vera through each step by phone that afternoon. Gloved hands, a sealed federal evidence bag, a chain of custody forms signed and photographed before the swap was made. Vera had acted under direct FBI instruction, which made her a cooperating witness, conducting a court-authorized evidence transfer, not a private citizen tampering with a crime scene. The original syringe had been in federal custody for 6 hours, chain of custody intact and unimpeachable. Grant stared at what was in my hand, then he looked at me. The color drained from his face so completely and so quickly that for one moment he looked like a different person, hollowed out, stripped of the performance that had sustained him for 15 years. His mouth opened, closed. His hand, the one holding the syringe, dropped slowly to his side. "Sloan," he said. His voice came out stripped of everything that usually gave it authority. Just a sound, just a name. "Put it down," I said. "On the nightstand, carefully." He did. His hand was shaking. Grant Whitmore, Cardiac Surgeon Institute Director, meticulous architect of my destruction, was shaking. "How long?" he asked. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Since the Hilton," I said. 11 days before the dinner where you watched me not drink my wine." I kept my voice even. I had rehearsed this moment in my head more times than I could count, and I had decided that I would not shout, that I would not cry, that I would give him nothing that looked like the pain he had spent months manufacturing. 11 days, Grant? Did you really think I would not notice you taught me to read financial patterns for a living? You were a pattern. Something crossed his face. Then, not remorse, not quite, but the specific anguish of a man who has lost a game he was absolutely certain he was winning. His jaw worked. His eyes were wet, actually wet, and I felt something complicated and cold move through me at the sight of it, because I knew those tears were not for me. They were for himself, for the version of his future that had just collapsed. I can explain, he started. The bedroom door opened behind him. Julian walked in first. Behind him, two FBI agents in dark jackets, badges visible, moving with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this before. Agent Reyes appeared in the doorway, her eyes going first to the syringe on the nightstand, then to Grant, then to me. Grant turned. The moment he saw the badges, what remained of his composure left him completely. His shoulders dropped. The syringe on the nightstand might as well have been a confession. The wire recording from Miller, the encrypted email, the shell companies, the cameras and his own gifts, all of it converged in this room in this moment into something that could not be argued or negotiated or charmed away. Grant Whitmore. Agent Reyes said, her voice level, "You are under arrest for attempted murder in the first degree and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say." He stopped listening. I watched him stop listening, watched his gaze leave Agent Reyes's face and travel slowly across the room until it found mine. He looked at me for a long time. For the first time in 15 years, Grant Whitmore had absolutely nothing to say. I held his gaze and did not look away. Not once. Not even when they put the handcuffs on. They read him his rights in our bedroom. In our bedroom, surrounded by things we had chosen together, the Italian mirror with its hidden lens, the silk curtains we had argued about for 20 minutes in a showroom on Madison Avenue, the photograph on the dresser from our 3rd anniversary in Positano, where we were both laughing at something I could no longer remember. Agent Reyes's voice was steady and practiced, each word placed with the careful efficiency of someone who understood that the legal language mattered and the setting did not. Grant did not speak during the reading. He kept his eyes on the floor. The man who had held court at surgical conferences, who had charmed every room he had ever walked into, who had looked me in the eye over poisoned milk for 18 months and said, "Sleep well, sweetheart." That man had simply ceased to exist the moment the handcuffs closed. What remained was smaller, diminished, a person rather than a performance. Julian touched my arm lightly as they led Grant through the bedroom door. "Are you all right?" "I do not know yet," I said honestly. "Ask me in an hour." He nodded and we followed them into the hallway. I watched Grant walk to the elevator. He did not look back. I thought he might thought there would be one last glance, one final attempt to read my face, to find something useful in my expression that he could use or exploit or appeal to. But he kept his eyes forward, his shoulders set, and the elevator doors closed behind him, and the two agents and the penthouse went very quiet in a way it had never been quiet before. Not peaceful, not yet, just empty of something that had taken up enormous space. "The documentation is ready," Julian said, appearing at my elbow with a folder. "Asset freeze covering all joint accounts, the Whitmore Institute endowment contributions, and Clara Weston's Claris Holdings. I need your signature on the civil filing to trigger the concurrent proceeding." I signed without sitting down, leaning over the kitchen counter with the pen Julian handed me, moving through the pages quickly, because the work was what kept everything else manageable. "Jade," I said, handing the folder back. "What happens with Jade?" Julian's expression shifted into something careful. "Agent Reyes has a warrant for her financial records. She will be called in for questioning tomorrow morning." A pause. "She is not facing criminal charges yet. The conspiracy charge depends on what Miller and the documentation establish about her direct participation versus passive benefit." "She participated," I said. "She signed her name to 2 of the Shell Company's subsidiary filings. Daniel pulled her signature from the Delaware Incorporation records." "Then she will likely face charges," Julian said. "The U.S. Attorney's Office will make that determination." My phone buzzed on the counter. A number I recognized, Jade's apartment, her landline, which she only used when she was genuinely frightened, the cellular too exposed somehow in moments of crisis. I stared at it for a moment. Then I answered. "Sloan?" Jade's voice came through in pieces high and fractured, the careful composure she maintained in public entirely gone. She was crying openly and hard, the kind of crying that has no performance in it. Sloan, someone called me a federal agent. They said I need to come in tomorrow morning. They said, Sloan, I am scared. I am so scared. I stood in the kitchen of my penthouse with Grant's absence still fresh in the air around me and listened to my little sister cry, and I felt something move through me that I had not expected. Not anger, not satisfaction, something older and more exhausted than either. Jade, I said, get a lawyer, tonight. Do not speak to anyone before you have legal representation. Are you going to help me? Her voice broke on the last word. Sloan, please, I know what I did, I know, but please. I am not going to help you avoid accountability, I said. My voice was steady, but not cruel. But I am telling you to get a lawyer because I do not want you walking into that room tomorrow without one. That is what I can give you right now. A broken sound from the other end of the line. Then, I am sorry. I am sorry for everything. I know, I said, and I did. That was the most complicated part. I believed her, and it changed nothing, and both of those things were true at the same time. Get the lawyer, Jade. I ended the call. Julian was watching me from across the kitchen. She called you, he said. She panicked, I said. She always runs to whoever she thinks can save her when things collapse. And you? Told her to get a lawyer. I set the phone face down on the counter. She is not my responsibility to rescue, but she is still my sister. Those two things are going to coexist for a very long time. Julian looked at me with something warm and steady in his expression. You are extraordinary, you know that. I am tired, I said, which is the closest thing to extraordinary I can manage tonight. He almost smiled. The almost smile that had been there for 11 years, quiet and constant, and finally something I could see clearly. Agent Reyes reappeared in the doorway. Mrs. Whitmore, we are done here for tonight. I will need you available tomorrow for a formal statement. Of course, I said. She glanced around the penthouse at the cameras still in place in the walls at the anniversary mirror, with its secret now fully exposed at the life that had been constructed so carefully around so many lies. And something in her expression said, she had seen this before. This specific kind of devastation, disguised as a beautiful home. He had planned everything, she said quietly, more to herself than to me. Almost everything, I said. She looked at me. Except you. Except me, I agreed. My phone lit up on the counter, Clara's name on the screen. I picked it up. Sloan, Clara said, and her voice had the particular controlled quality of a woman who has just heard something she was not prepared for and is deciding in real time how much to reveal. We need to talk. Yes, I said, we do. Jade called me the next morning. Not the panicked, fractured call from the night before. This one was different. Controlled, measured. The voice of a woman who had slept badly, cried until she had nothing left, and then woken up and decided to try a different approach. I want to meet, she said, in person, just the two of us. I knew what she was doing. I had watched Jade deploy her particular brand of strategy my entire life, the softening of the voice, the careful positioning of herself as someone who needed to be understood rather than confronted. She had used it on our mother, on teachers, on gallery owners, on Grant. She was very good at it. The coffee shop on Lexington, I said. 9 o'clock? She was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table wrapped in a camel coat with her dark hair down and her eyes slightly swollen from crying. She looked young. She always looked young when she needed something. It was one of her most reliable tools. She stood when she saw me, and for a moment something genuinely uncertain moved across her face. Not the performed vulnerability, but something underneath it, something real. Thank you for coming, she said. Sit down, Jade, I said. We ordered coffee. The cafe around us hummed with ordinary Tuesday morning life. A man on a laptop, two women with strollers, a barista calling out names in a cheerful voice that belonged to a different universe entirely. I wrapped both hands around my cup and looked at my sister across the small table. She opened her mouth and I recognized immediately what was coming, the explanation, the context, the carefully constructed narrative of how this had not been entirely her fault, how she had been influenced, how she had not understood the full scope of what Grant was doing, how she was young and stupid and blinded by feelings she was not proud of. I had heard versions of this speech from Jade my whole life applied to smaller betrayals, smaller destructions. I let her say 4 sentences. Then I reached into my bag and placed a sealed envelope on the table between us. Jade stopped talking. She looked at the envelope, then at me. "What is that?" she asked, though something in her face said she already suspected. "Open it," I said. She did slowly with the hands of a woman who understood that whatever was inside was going to cost her something. She pulled out the document and unfolded it, and I watched her read. I watched the moment she reached the bottom of the first page, the page that bore in her own handwriting her signature on a subsidiary filing for one of the shell companies in Grant's financial structure. The color left her face completely. "Jade," I said quietly, "you signed your name to a financial fraud. Not because Grant forced you to. Not because you did not understand what you were doing. You signed it because you wanted the apartment and the shows and the money, and you knew exactly what it was when you picked up the pen." Her hands were shaking. She put the document down on the table and pressed her fingers flat on it, as if she could push it back into being something else. "It was not supposed to go this far," she said. Her voice cracked on every other word. He said it was restructuring, that nobody would get hurt, that you had so much money, it would not even register." "It registered," I said. "I know." Her chin dropped to her chest, her shoulders began to shake. I know, Sloan, I know." The tears came then genuinely this time, not the careful, pretty crying she had perfected, but the ugly, gasping kind, the kind that has no audience in mind. "I hated myself every day. I want you to know that. Every single day." "I believe you," I said. She looked up surprised. "Hating yourself does not undo what you did," I said. "But I believe you. That is what makes this so hard." I reached across the table, not to take her hand, just to place mine near hers. "I spent so much of my life trying to protect you. When Dad died, and Mom became whoever she became, I was the one who made sure you had everything you needed, and I did it because I loved you, not out of obligation, because you were my sister and I genuinely loved you." Jade pressed her hand over her mouth. Her whole body was shaking now, the coat pulled tight around her as if she were cold, even though the cafe was warm. Tears ran down her face and dripped from her chin, and she did not wipe them away. "I am so sorry," she said, muffled behind her hand. "I am so deeply, deeply sorry." "I know," I said. "And I need you to take that to a lawyer, and then to a federal prosecutor, and say it there with the same honesty you are showing me right now. Because that is the only version of sorry that means anything at this point." She cried harder, huge heaving sobs. She could not control her mascara running in dark lines down her cheeks, completely undone. The it girl of the New York art world reduced to something small and raw and finally real. I watched her and felt the grief of it settle in my chest like something that would live there for a long time. Not anger, not resentment, but the particular sadness of loving someone who chose to become something that made them impossible to keep. I stood. "Jade." I waited until she looked up at me, eyes red, mascara gone, face completely unguarded for perhaps the first time in her adult life. "I loved you. That is why this hurts. Not because you won. Not because you took something I cannot replace." I paused. "But because you never had to do any of this. You were already enough. You just never believed it." I left the money for the coffee on the table. I walked out into the cold morning air and did not look back. Behind me, through the glass, I could see Jade still sitting at the table with her hands pressed over her face and her shoulders moving with the kind of crying that cannot be performed, only survived. I had said everything I needed to say. There was nothing left to go back for. My mother had spent 30 years protecting the wrong daughter. The law did not care about her reasons. Julian called me at 11:30 on a Thursday morning while I was standing at the window of Blackwood Capitol, watching the city move below with the particular indifference it reserves for personal catastrophes. I had been expecting his call. I had been dreading it in equal measure. "The warrant has been executed," he said. "Federal agents are at her residence now. Clara Weston is being taken in for questioning on conspiracy charges related to the financial fraud. The U.S. Attorney's Office expects to file formal charges by end of week." I pressed my forehead briefly against the cold glass of the window. "Is she all right?" I asked. The question surprised me as I said it. that I was still capable of asking it. Julian was quiet for a moment on the other end, not hesitating, just choosing. She was at home when they arrived, he said carefully. She answered the door herself. I thought about that. Clara Weston in her cashmere and her pearls opening her door to federal agents on a Thursday morning. I thought about the expression on her face in that moment, whether she had been surprised or whether some part of her had been waiting for it since the night she had sent that message to my phone. I am not going there, I said. I know, Julian said. I did not think you would. She will want me to, I said. At some point when it becomes real, she will call, and she will want me to come, and she will use the language of family and obligation the way she always has, to make me feel that my absence is the cruelty rather than the thing she did. I paused. I am not going. You do not have to, Julian said. Sloane, you do not owe her your presence at her consequences. I pulled back from the window. I know, I said. I know that. And I did know it in the part of me that had been built on 30 years of professional discipline and clear-eyed decision-making. But there is always another part, the part that formed before the discipline did in the years when you are small and unguarded, and the world is defined entirely by whether or not your mother looks at you with warmth, and that part was considerably less certain. I told Julian I would call him in the afternoon. Then I sat down at my desk, pulled a sheet of paper from the drawer, and began to write. I was 7 years old the first time I understood that my mother looked at me differently than she looked at Jade. Jade had fallen and scraped her knee in the back garden, and Clara had gathered her up with both arms and pressed her face into Jade's hair and rocked her back and forth, saying, "My baby, my sweet girl," in a voice I had never heard her use before. I stood 3 feet away, holding my own scuffed palm, which I had scraped on the same stone, and I watched, and I understood, without being able to articulate it yet, that I was witnessing something I was not going to be included in. I had scraped my palm on my own over the years in various ways, and Clara had always been technically present for it. She had bandaged, advised, occasionally consoled. She had done everything a mother was supposed to do in the ways that could be observed and documented. But she had never gathered me up. She had never pressed her face into my hair. She had never looked at me the way she looked at Jade, like I was something irreplaceable. I had spent 30 years trying to earn that look. I had built a fund. I had graced magazine covers. I had come home for every holiday and called every Sunday and never once told her directly how much her distance cost me, because I had always believed that if I was simply good enough, successful enough, useful enough, the look would come. It had never come. It was never going to come. And sitting at my desk with a sheet of paper in front of me, I finally let that be true without trying to revise it. I wrote for 20 minutes. The letter was not long, 3 paragraphs, a single page. I did not describe what she had done or enumerate the ways she had chosen Grant and Jade over me or explain the scope of damage caused by her decisions. She knew all of that. The federal indictment would articulate it far more precisely than I could. What I wrote was simpler than any of that. I wrote about the girl in the garden. I wrote about 30 years of Sundays and holidays and magazine covers, and the particular exhaustion of spending your entire life trying to be loved by someone who has already decided you remind them too much of someone they lost. I wrote that I understood now, not that I accepted it, but that I understood it, and that understanding, unlike acceptance, did not require her to deserve it. And then I wrote the last 3 sentences. I forgive you, not for you, for the girl I was who kept trying to make you love her. I folded the letter. I addressed the envelope to her home, knowing she might not read it for days, knowing she might never respond. Knowing that the forgiveness it contained would do nothing to alter the legal proceedings moving forward regardless. It was not written to change anything. It was written to put something down that I had been carrying for 30 years without realizing the full weight of it. I handed it to my assistant and asked her to mail it that afternoon. Then I sat back in my chair and breathed. Long and slow and deliberate, the way you breathe when something that has been pressing on your chest finally incrementally begins to lift. Julian called back at 3 o'clock with updates from the U.S. Attorney's Office. I listened carefully and asked precise questions, and took notes in my own handwriting on a yellow legal pad, because the work was still the work, and the work still had to be done. But something in me was different now, lighter. as if a room I had been locked in without knowing had finally opened not onto anything dramatic or resolved or complete, but simply onto open air. Some debts are not paid with revenge, they are paid with release. I was only beginning to understand what that meant, but for the first time I believed it. Blackwood Capital opened higher the Monday after Grant's arrest. I took it as a sign, not a dramatic one. The market does not care about personal catastrophes any more than the city does, and I had learned long ago not to ask the numbers for emotional validation. But the Dow was up 214 points that morning. The fund's primary positions were performing cleanly, and the coffee that Vera, who had declined my offer to arrange a very generous severance and simply return to work the following week, as if nothing could have persuaded her to leave, brought to my desk at 7:15 was exactly the right temperature. Some mornings that is enough. The divorce proceedings moved forward with the quiet efficiency of a well-organized legal structure, which is to say they moved forward the way Julian had designed them to, without noise, without unnecessary drama, with the particular satisfaction of watching something built correctly do exactly what it was built to do. The financial settlement was significant. The criminal trial was scheduled. The Institute had appointed an interim director. Grant's colleagues, when interviewed by the press, used words like shocked and devastated, and never suspected, which told me everything I needed to know about the performance he had sustained for decades. I did not read the coverage. I had read enough of Grant's narratives. I was not interested in the final one. Daniel knocked on my office door at 9 and presented the quarter's preliminary numbers, which were by any reasonable measure excellent. I went through them with him line by line, asking the questions I always asked, making the notes I always made, and when he left, I sat for a moment with the folder in my lap and thought about how strange it was that the numbers, the positions, the clean logic of capital well managed, had always been the most reliable version of myself. Everything else had been built on assumptions that turned out to be false. But the work had been mine completely and consistently from the first day I had understood what it meant to see a pattern in the market before anyone else did. That had never been taken from me. He had tried with the Ponzi structure and the federal liability he had been constructing around my name. But the fund was still here. My name on the door was still mine. I stood at the window at 11 o'clock, which was when Julian arrived. I heard him exchange a few words with my assistant in the outer office. Something light, I could not make out the words. And then the door opened, and I did not turn around immediately. I stayed at the window, looking out at the city, at the particular geometry of Manhattan that I had memorized so thoroughly over the years that I could navigate it in my sleep. The Hudson catching the November light, the bridges in the distance, a helicopter moving north above the park unhurried. "You did not tell me to come," Julian said from behind me. "I did not have to," I said. He came to stand beside me at the window, not close enough to be presumptuous, just present the way he had been present for 11 years, at the right distance at the right time with the right amount of quiet. "How are you?" he asked, not the lawyer version of the question, the real one. I considered it honestly. "I am tired," I said. "I am genuinely deeply tired in a way I think is going to take a long time to resolve. And I paused, searching for the right word, because precision had always mattered more to me than approximation. Lighter than I was, even though I did not know how heavy it was. "You could not have known," he said. "You were inside it. I should have seen it sooner." Sloane. His voice was gentle and firm, in equal measure the particular combination that had always been his. "You saw it when you saw it, and then you did something about it. That is all anyone can do." I looked at him, then properly looked the way I had been carefully not looking for 11 years, because looking too directly at something you are afraid to want is its own kind of self-protection. He looked tired too. The case had cost him months of late nights and early mornings and conversations he had not been able to share with anyone outside the room. His tie was slightly loose. There were lines around his eyes that had not been as deep a year ago. He was, I thought, the most trustworthy person I had ever known, and the fact that it had taken me this long to see it clearly was not wisdom. It was cowardice dressed as professionalism. "Julian," I said. "Yes," he said. "I would like to have dinner with you," I said. "Not to discuss the case, not to review documents, Not because I need something from you legally or strategically. I held his gaze. Just dinner, you and me, because I want to. Something moved across his face, relief and warmth, and the ghost of 11 years of patient, uncomplicated love that had simply waited without demanding anything in return. I know a place, he said, on the west side. They make the best lamb in the city. Lamb, I said. And something about the word made me laugh quietly briefly, the first real laugh I could remember, in longer than I could calculate. He smiled. Not the professional smile, not the careful one. The real one, which I realized I had been seeing in pieces for years without understanding what it meant. Saturday, he said. Saturday, I said. I turned back to the window. The city moved below us, indifferent and brilliant and entirely unconcerned with the fact that somewhere inside it a woman was standing in the life she had built, battered and restructured, and more completely her own than it had ever been, and was choosing for the first time in a very long time to want something simply because she wanted it. No strategy, no calculation, no performance. People ask me what family betrayal does to a person. I used to think it breaks you. I was wrong. Family betrayal does not break you, it reveals you. It strips every assumption you made about who loves you and why and what remains. If you are paying attention, is the clearest version of yourself you have ever seen. I will not pretend the path I chose was painless. Family revenge. The quiet legal kind costs something no spreadsheet can measure. But here is what family revenge taught me. The moment you stop protecting someone who never protected you, you reclaim something they counted on you to surrender forever. If there is one thing I would tell you, do not be like me. Do not wait years to see clearly. Do not confuse loyalty with blindness or love with silence. The people who truly love you will never need you to disappear to make room for them. I am not a religious woman by habit. But the night the handcuffs closed, I thanked God quietly, genuinely, not for the outcome, but for the clarity that came before it was too late. Family betrayal is not the end of your story, and family revenge, built on truth rather than anger, is not cruelty, it is justice. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply choose to live well. If this story moved you in any way, I would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And if stories like this speak to you, subscribe so you are always the first to know when the next one arrives. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with me until the very end. One final note. The stories ahead contain fictional elements woven together purely for reflection and meaningful conversation. If that is not the right fit for you, no hard feelings at all. Step away and find what speaks to you better. But if you choose to stay, I am so genuinely glad you are here.
I'm freezing. I'm bleeding. Slowly fading away. But don't worry. I'm fine. The cold has settled in my heartbeat, like winter living in my veins. Every breath feels numb and fragile. Every smile just hides the pain. I'm breaking quietly in silence, falling slow without a sound. Yet I keep saying I'm okay, while my world burns to the ground. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry. I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. Maybe pain just learned to live here. Maybe sorrow feels like home. So I wear my wounds like armor and survive them all alone. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. If you ever see me smiling, know it's just my last defense. 'Cause sometimes love means hiding how much you're suffering. No, I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. It's okay.
Some days feel off, like I'm standing but still falling. A little pain, a little tired, and no one to tell it all to.
There are days that feel unsteady, like I'm drifting out of place. Every step just feels so heavy, with a smile I have to fake. A little hurt I keep inside me, a little weight I always hide, and 1,000 quiet worries I've been holding deep inside. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. I keep walking through the silence like it's all I've ever known. Every crowded room reminds me how it feels to be alone. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. Maybe one day I'll be stronger, maybe I'll learn how to speak, but for now I keep it buried in the parts of me too weak. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you.